Why, hello there. Let's start off by saying it's been a hot minute since I've read a book that was at least about 900 pages. So it took me a while to get through this one. The book we're going to talk about today is the fourth book in the Dark Tower series, Wizard and Glass. And this book felt like two books in one. And I think the reason it felt like that is because you jump into the story and it's a continuation on from what was happening in the prior book, The Wastelands. So you have Roland, Jake, Eddie, Oi, and Susanna. They're on Blaine the train and they're hurling to what could possibly be their death if they can't tell Blaine a riddle that stumps him. And so this is where the book starts out. But as you get past that part, and we'll get into all this, you also have a whole lot of backstory and you get more insight into Roland and why he is the way he is. And you see more of some of the characters that had been mentioned, his best friends growing up, Elaine and Cuthbert, the love of his life, Susan Delgado, and the whole story of them and what happened there. And, it also ties in John Farson or Martin, whatever the heck his name is, the good man who is not such a good man. This book was a chunk of a book. I felt the size of the book was necessary to tell a story such as this. And there's so much important detail that you get into on this journey, and there's so much that it's overwhelming at times, but also this is another one. I loved it. Now, I honestly, until I finish the series, I'm not going to be able to say which is my favorite thus far, but I am kind of leaning towards the Wastelands. But I don't know because there's still a bunch more books to read, so can't say anything. But I love this one too. I have not disliked any of these books so far. Okay, so we last left our heroes or our gunslingers on Blaine the train, who is a sentient train who's kind of insane. Not kind of, is insane. And he just wants to be told riddles. And he has agreed that if they can stump him with a riddle, he won't kill them when he reaches the end of his tracks. So they are trying to do this right now, and Roland, he grew up riddling. That was like a huge pastime and part of fair days back in the day when he had a kingdom that he belonged to before the good man kind of went to overthrow and ruin everything and bring death to all the lands. He has what he thinks are tons and tons of riddles in his head. So Roland is telling riddles and Blaine is just like one after another, just answering them right off the bat. And then Jake still has this book. Susanna knows a few, and Eddie's has a bunch of riddles or jokes that Roland thinks are dumb and does not want him to tell because he thinks that, this is their life or death situation. And yeah, Eddie needs to take it seriously. But in lieu of this, Roland tells all his riddles. Jake gets up and reads all the ones from the book. Blaine knows all those. Susanna does too. And Eddie, this whole time, he's thinking, he's thinking. And he caught one time when Blaine slightly faltered. He was thinking of something that he'd heard that he should remember, that he should know. And then he decides he's going to tell his dumb jokes anyway because he's got a hunch that maybe playing it straight ain't the way to go here. And so Eddie gets up and he starts telling his, dumb jokes about why did the dead baby cross the road? Because it was stapled to the chicken. And this just makes Blaine kind of go ballistic to where he somewhat explodes, but not quite. Like, it makes him severely malfunction where Eddie basically saves the day and they don't all die. They make it to their destination, which continues them on towards the Dark Tower. And they have to end up, I think, climbing out the top and like kind of like grappling over the side because the train is destroyed when it finally hits their destination. And they end up in Kansas. But it's not the Kansas of really any of their times. Everything seems to be a little bit off. Like they see in this parking lot all these cars that are like normal brands, Chevrolet, Ford, but then they see like a Takuro. I think it was a Takuro. That might not be the name. I apologize if that's the wrong name. And then there was like slight differences with like different chains that they saw of like restaurants. Like there'd be like normal ones, and then there would be like Boing Boing burgers. Like that doesn't exist in any of their worlds. it seems that they've come into a time that is or maybe hadn't existed, and they're not sure how or why they're here, but this is part of the journey, right? And they find a newspaper, and the newspaper says what happens was there was this crazy pandemic flu that they called, oh, they called it something real weird. In one part of the country, it was like tube worm. No, let me look this up. In one part of the country, it was called tube neck, and the other part, it was called Captain Trips. And so it seems like everyone has died. There doesn't seem to be like any kind of movement. There's barely any animals. Every once in a while, they might hear a bird, but there's dead bodies in the train station. And then they see this highway, and it's I-70. And on I-70, all these cars are just all stopped and abandoned there. And, some of them have skeletons in the car and whatnot. And so they start their journey. They're not quite sure at this point because Blaine was following the path of the beam, but it doesn't seem like they're following the beam anymore. So that's a bit concerning. And they start going down I-70, following intuition or whatever it is that they're following, and they start heading that way. And at some point in the distance, they see this big, shiny, like, tower that's built in the middle of the expressway. And so Eddie is like, oh my god, do you see that? And I'm sure he's thinking like it's the Dark Tower or something like that. And Roland's like, well, not yet. We can't be sure what it is till we get closer. And eventually he's like, yeah, it's trouble, but let's not think about trouble till trouble is in front of us, let's not dwell there. At this point, they go and they make camp. And I forget if it was when they were at the train station that Susanna and Eddie maybe were asking him more about like his life, and it came up about Elaine and Cuthbert and Susan, and he was like, it's a story that he needed to tell them, but he's like, we gotta wait one more day before I tell this story, because this is like the life-altering moments in his life on his path towards the Dark Tower. Roland, that is, if I didn't make that clear. When they finally make camp and Roland starts to tell the story, this is a huge, giant chunk of the book, which it's almost most of the book. Because I would say that the parts about their current times is a bit in the front and a bit towards the end, a hint in the middle, but most of it is about when Roland, at age 14, goes with Elaine and Cuthbert, and they're sent out to the west to Megis. I'm not sure if that's how you say that. And they're sent there just to be safe, to be away from Martin and any kind of troubles. So Roland's father sends him that way, and he had sent him a warning too that was like, if you see a pink ball or the wizard's grapefruit, which he didn't really think he was going to come across this or anything, but it was just kind of like a warning. It's like, be warned, or however they spoke. He starts telling the story about them going into Megis. It's the three of them. They take on other names just because people might have known their fathers and whatnot. And when the testing of gunslingers happens, if they failed their test, which Roland didn't, he passed and became a gunslinger, a lot of them are exiled and are to go to the West. And so they didn't want to use their own names because maybe some of those people might know who they are. They arrive in this town, which is far off and kind of close to the desert. There's a lot of horses there, and they make camp on this place. I think in the first nights they say they're called the Drop. They're gonna get a feel for the town, and they're supposed to go there, and they're supposed to, like, their job is they're part of this thing called the Affiliation. The Affiliation is fighting the good man, or John Farson, who is the bad guy who just brings death to everything and is trying to fell the kingdom where Roland came from, and basically like seems like take over the world. And so they're sent there because it seems to be far enough away from everything where nothing should be really going on there, but that's not how these things go, is it? Of course there's going to be something underlying and going on there, but we don't know that yet, but we will. So they're supposed to go there to like count everything to see what they can send to the Affiliation if it is needed for the war that is going on. When they get there, before everything that happens, one night, Susan Delgado, who lives in this town, she's out riding her horse, and she is to become the mayor of the town, Mayor Thorne, his gilly, or his whore, or his prostitute, because his wife cannot bear children, and he wants, an heir. Also, he's a horny old goat that just wants a young thing with perky tits. So, he's gross. This is gonna set up Susan and her horrible aunt Cordelia. They're gonna get a bunch of money and be set, and she'll be part of the mayor's household and all of that, so that benefits the family. And basically, the aunt is just greedy and kind of talked her into it and made Susan feel bad about it and was like, she kind of bullied her into it. And Susan was 16. She's young and dumb. How's she supposed to know any freaking better? Well, anyways, so yes, she's to be the mayor's whore. But first, she has to be proven that she is pure. So she has to go visit this witch, Rhea of Kos, who's gonna basically grope her and, make sure she's pure up there. You can imagine how that might be done. I can't remember if she does that first and then she meets Roland. Pretty sure she does. I think she goes to the witch. The witch is really gross and creepy and maybe a little too touchy-feely at points. Susan goes there, she gets it over with. The witch does her thing. She's like, okay, you're pure, whatever. And then Susan's like, okay, am I done? Are we good? And then the witch is like, well, she hypnotizes her, so Susan doesn't even hear any of this. And she's like, mayhap there might be one more thing that you could help me with. And you don't find out what it is until later on. And she's like, got some little trick she's up to that she thinks will be funny once her and the mayor finally have sex. That the witch thinks will be humorous. Something that the mayor probably won't find humorous at all. Anyway, she leaves there. And while she's riding home, she meets Roland and they start talking and chatting. And I think at that moment, they basically like fall in love with each other. They don't really know this yet. And she knows that she has to do this thing for her family and all of that stuff. But, the teenage heart and hormones too. What can you really do with that? And the mayor too is like this old goat that's like 50 years older than Susan. So, and she's like, maybe I didn't think this through. Maybe that wasn't such a good idea to agree to. But then she thinks of her father and like people who break their word for the stuff that they're gonna do, even if it's really crappy. But she's like, would my father really want to see me doing this? But he probably wouldn't have. He would have been like, there are sometimes places that you should break your word. Anyways. And also, Susan was like, when you meet me again, please use discretion and act like it's the first time we've ever met. Because, and she doesn't really tell him why. He doesn't know why yet. The boys come to town. They talk to different people in town. They talk to the sheriff, Herc Avery, who is a very gassy man who's always eating. He's always seems to be eating and have a lot of farts. Thought I should mention that. I think Stephen King finds farts funny because I find this in some of his books. Anyways, I digress. It gets set up that the mayor is going to have a welcoming dinner and have Roland, Elaine, and Cuthbert all come to this dinner to meet everyone so they can talk about all the stuff they'll be counting in town. And, they're known for their horses and all of that. And so they come, and everyone's like super over helpful, like where it seems disingenuous and very suspicious about, oh yeah, they're so gung-ho to help and cheery about it. And it's almost weird because some of these people are not known for behaving like this at all. That of itself is suspicious. So first, the three lads decide that they're gonna count all like the fisherman stuff because they already kind of have an inkling that there's way too many horses in town, and the amount of horses when they had asked about it was way undercounted of what they had. So this dinner happens, and then they start to get to know the people in town, and then Roland and Susan run into each other a few more times. He finds out at that dinner that she's the mayor's whore, and then he's like super upset and jealous and just like, what the F? And he doesn't blow her cover or say anything about that meeting before, and he's very good about it. After this night, he's like kind of got weird and emotional about finding out this information. And then he says something that he might kind of regret later, which he does apologize for, and then they talk again, and eventually, the big chunk of the story is the love story of Roland and Susan. It's teenagers in love, and it's emotional and sad, and I think, and it's tragic, as the great love stories in books can often be, with great love sometimes comes great tragedy. The story continues on, and you go through, and they find out more and more suspicious things about this town. There's also this like weird oil field that has working like oil Derricks, is that what they're called? I'm not sure the word, so I do apologize about that. But there's 19 working ones, and Susan knows this. And Susan is actually a pretty knowledgeable wealth of info about the town, so she's able to help them and give them information. And then also the guys too, they find out that they have like oxen that supposedly they don't have. They had way more horses than they were supposed to. And then there's the mysterious Sitco field, right? None of the townsfolk really use the oil from there, but they do have at the sheriff's station, they have like a refrigerator that they power with the oil or gas from there, and there were some other things too. I think they had like heating and cooling at the cop shop. And it came from there. But the thing is, like, what are they gonna use that for? What are they gonna use that oil for? So eventually, like, Roland goes over there and he goes there with Susan because he's like, you know this place, you kind of know what's up. I just want to like investigate and see if there's something here that's going on. And so they find all these tankers that are full of oil. And she was saying too that she thought it was all dry. And so they found this one pipe. Roland sticks his hand in there and it's just like covered in like oil and stuff. And it's like, nope, that is not run dry and it's still working and all of that stuff. So it seems what they're going to do with this stuff, and half the town, maybe more, is all on the good man's side. They're all in conspiracy against like the other kingdoms and not in aid of the affiliation like they were pretending to be. So, you know, the boys are really young, so everyone like underestimates the crap out of them. And they don't think they're at first a problem, but then they think maybe they might be. And then suspicion grows and tensions grow. So it gets to the point where what's going to happen with these oil tankers is the good man, or John Farson, has these machines of war that he needs that oil or gas, the power, and that will be how he destroys a bunch of people. He still needs to refine it, but Roland and them believe that he probably has a way to do this. And so they're not sure when all this is going to go down. And so there's these three guys who work for the mayor. They're like his bodyguards. They're called the Big Coffin Hunters or whatever. And they're kind of frat bags, and they're on the John Farson side and are basically just like, they're not people you would want working for you. They're not honest men. They're crap bags. So basically they conspire to do a bunch of things. They decide that they're going to kill the mayor. They're also going to get rid of his chancellor guy. And so they're double crossing one of the dudes. And then they're going to blame it all on the boys and say, oh, it was them. They did this. And so then they'll like hang them up, or they'll burn them on this bonfire for come reap, which is the harvest. And this is a festival that they would have in other places across like Midworld and the different regions of the land. So that's their plan. The boys kind of realize that this is probably what they're going to try to do, is like to frame them. And so they conspire a plan together with Susan and this other guy, Chimi, who the whole town thinks is mentally just an idiot. And he may be a little slower, but he is not the stupid guy that everyone in town like thinks he is. And they underestimated him too. A lot of the townsfolk are just horrible. They figure out a plan where they're gonna take a ton of like firecrackers and stuff, and they're gonna go blow up the Sitco field, and then they got to take care of the tankers. And they're trying to figure out how like the people who will chase them, obviously, because this is not going to go without people giving chase or coming after them, how to take them out. They're going to have to kill a lot of people to do this. But, you know, it's for the greater good. Otherwise, instead of like 200 people dying, thousands or who knows how many will die by these machines of war that John Farson's going to need that fuel to fuel up, carry out his plans. And so they go to figure out their plan, and things kind of go awry and don't go how they should. But they do end up destroying the oil fields and the other stuff, but some people get caught in the crossfire and not everyone makes it out. And I don't want to say too much if you haven't read the series. I mean, the series has been around for a long time. I am late to the party, but it was such a great book. Oh, and then once you finally like, okay, so Roland tells a story of his love, of what happened at Megis and all the craziness with that. And then he comes back to the present, right? Now you remember there was this big tower that's built right in the middle of I-70. So they're gonna continue on their journey, and Eddie and Susanna are like, or maybe it was Eddie was like, "Hey, how do you feel?" And Roland's like, "Surprisingly better." I feel surprisingly better telling that story. Like I must have needed to get that off my chest all these years later. There's so much more to the story, but it's 900 pages, and I don't want to give away all the like huge spoilers in case you haven't read that. But as I said, it's action, adventure, it's love, it's tragedy, it's just a wild, weird, awesome story. All right, so that building, which as they get closer, they discover is this giant glass castle. And it's emerald green, just shining in the sunlight like the dang Wizard of Oz's castle. And oh boy, is it tied into the Wizard of Oz as they all get closer to this castle, which is meant to be trouble, as we do know. They find laid out for them ruby red shoes. There's a pair of red cowboy boots for Roland. There's little red booties for Oi, the bumbler. I think Jake has more like a tennis shoe. And they had whatever our cappies are for Susanna that like I guess went over her knees because she doesn't have any legs. So they went over like her kneecaps. And so each person had like a different type of shoe. And so they start talking about the Wizard of Oz and like, they're like knock our heels together 3 times or whatever. So they get up to this big green Wizard of Oz castle. They're looking at the gates, and the gates have these different colored poles of the rainbow. There are 6 of them, you know, all in the different colors, and in the middle, there is a black one. In this, oh, I forgot the whole thing about the wizard's freaking rainbow. So there's also, in this story, there's this glass ball called the Wizard's Rainbow, and it's a pink ball that shows you the future, but the ball is very mischievous and doesn't always show you everything. So it leads you on, but it might lead you to the wrong conclusions. And so that played in big too with the backstory of Roland and his friends, and this ball that was John Farson had it, but they had given it to this witch to hold on to because the ball, like, it drains you and sucks your life force if you hold it or with it for too long. It can easily kill you. And Roland ended up seeing a bunch of stuff in this ball as well, which misled him to certain tragic events. Anyway, as I said, there is a lot to this story, and yeah, so they get to this wizard's castle. Well, they try to open the gate. They can't get in. So then they realize, okay, well, let's click our heels together 3 times. And they do that, but then they're like, oh, we forgot Oi. So then Oi, they take him and they knock his little feet together at the same time as them. And then they are able to open the gates. And they go in there. And they find Wizard Martin. Stuff happens in there, and after that happens, there's one more part to the story that Roland has to share with them, which he does, and he has them all. They find the wizard's glass is there again. It's there. It was with Martin or whatever, and he dropped it, and so they all look into the glass, and Roland shows them the last part of himself that he'd been like hiding, and part of what happened with his family, and so they all share in that. Somehow they're all like, after they see this vision of Roland's memories of what happened, they're all like teleported out of the castle, and they end up quite a bit away, and it puts them back on the path of the beam, which is where they're meant to be. And then this is where we'll go into the next book, but I haven't got there yet. So, oh god, I could talk so much more about this, but me and Jason of Jason's Weird Reads are doing a podcast where we're talking about each of these books, and we've recorded the first 3. So now that I've finished this one, we'll be doing a whole podcast episode about it. So we'll be a much deeper dive into it. So if you're interested in that, I will link his podcast episode. I don't know when the 4th one will be out. It'll probably be a while from now. But the first episode is out. And maybe by the time this video is out, maybe the second one will be. It might not be. I don't know. So yeah, if you do want to hear more about this book and more in depth, then definitely check that out. If you're interested or haven't seen my other videos about the other books in the Dark Tower, the next video coming up will be the playlist for all my videos about the Dark Tower so far. So this is the 4th one in the series. I also have it for book 1, 2, and 3. Also, if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.